You've met someone kind, principled, even heroic, until they weren't. The neighbor who volunteers at shelters but spreads cruel gossip. The boss praised for integrity who hides company crimes. We tell ourselves monsters look different, sound different. But the truth is uglier. Ordinary people, people like you, like me, hold that same darkness. This isn't about villains. It's about how anyone can justify harm layer by layer until the unthinkable feels normal. Today, we're tearing apart the psychology behind good people doing terrible things. I'll show you the invisible traps, the tiny compromises, the group pressures, the stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night. And near the end, I'll share a single question that reveals how close any of us might be to crossing a line we swore we'd never touch. Miss this, and you risk missing the one tool that keeps your moral compass intact when everything starts to spiral. No demons, no fairy tales, just the science of how everyday choices rewrite who we are. Let's start where it always begins, not with a knife or a lie, but a story we convince ourselves is true. You've probably met someone who seemed like a good person, kind, thoughtful, maybe even someone you admired. But then, something shifts. They start making choices that hurt others, and you're left wondering how someone like that could do something so wrong. That's the mask of morality. It's not that they suddenly became evil. It's that they found a way to justify their actions, even when those actions caused harm. Think about it this way. Evil in psychological terms isn't always about mustache-twirling villains. It's about people who do harmful things but convince themselves it's okay. Maybe they tell themselves it's for the greater good, or that they had no other choice. That's the paradox. Good people, people who care about doing the right thing, can still end up doing terrible things because they've found a way to rationalize it. Take someone like a corporate executive. They might start their career with the best intentions, wanting to make a difference, to lead with integrity. But over time, the pressure builds. Maybe they're told to cut corners to meet a deadline, or they're promised a promotion if they just fudge the numbers a little. At first, it feels wrong, but they tell themselves it's just this one time. Then it happens again, and again, until one day, they're at the center of a massive fraud scandal. And everyone is asking how someone so good could do something so bad. It's not that they woke up one day and decided to be evil. It's that they slowly convinced themselves that what they were doing wasn't so bad. That's the mask of morality. The way good people can hide their harmful actions behind a veil of justification. And it's a reminder that none of us are immune. The line between good and evil isn't as clear as we'd like to think. It starts small, almost harmless. A tiny compromise here, a little lie there. You tell yourself it's just this once, that it doesn't really matter. But that's the thing about slippery slopes. They don't feel dangerous until you're already sliding. This is how good people begin to change, step by step, without even realizing it. Think about the foot-in-the-door technique. It's not some grand, dramatic shift. It's subtle. Someone asks you to do something small, something you wouldn't think twice about. Maybe it's bending a rule or ignoring something you know isn't right. You do it because it feels insignificant. But then the next request is a little bigger, a little harder to justify. And before you know it, you're doing things you never thought you'd do. This is where cognitive dissonance comes in. When your actions don't match the way you see yourself, your mind starts to twist things to make it fit. You tell yourself stories to ease the discomfort. I had no choice, or it's for the greater good. Slowly, your self-image shifts. You're not the person you thought you were, but you don't notice it happening. The Stanford prison experiment is a perfect example of this. Ordinary people were put in roles of power, and within days, they started acting in ways that shocked even themselves. It wasn't because they were bad people. It was because the situation pulled them down that slope, one small step at a time. It's easy to judge from the outside, but the truth is, none of us are immune. The slope is always there waiting. And the scariest part, you might not even feel yourself slipping until it's too late. Sometimes it's not just about who we are as individuals. It's about who we become when we are part of a group. Think about it. When you're surrounded by others, especially in a setting where everyone seems to agree or go along with something, it's easy to lose yourself. This is where groupthink and deindividuation come into play. Groupthink is when the desire to fit in or avoid conflict overrides your own judgment. Deindividuation is that feeling of anonymity, where you stop seeing yourself as an individual and start blending into the crowd. Together, they can make good people do things they'd never do alone. Take a toxic workplace, for example. Maybe you've seen it happen. Someone gets treated unfairly, but no one speaks up. Not because they are bad people, but because everyone else is staying quiet. The silence feels safer. It's easier to go along with the group than to stand out and risk being the one who disrupts the status quo. Over time, that silence can turn into complicity. You might not even realize it's happening until you're part of something you never thought you'd tolerate. It's not just about workplaces, though. This dynamic shows up everywhere, online, in communities, even in friendships. The group becomes a kind of shield, making it harder to hold yourself accountable. And the scary part is, it doesn't take much for the line between right and wrong to blur. The truth is, the pack has power. It can pull you in directions you never intended to go. But it's also a reminder that staying true to yourself, even when it's hard, is one of the most important things you can do. Because in the end, it's not just about what the group does, it's about what you choose to do within it. You've probably seen it happen. Someone who seems kind, even good, does something unthinkable. How does that shift happen? It's not always about being born evil or suddenly snapping. Sometimes it's about moral disengagement, a way people convince themselves that doing harm is okay. Albert Bandura, a psychologist, explained this idea. It's like flipping a switch in your mind where you stop seeing your actions as wrong. You justify them instead. Think about it. Someone might say they deserved it, or I'm just following orders. These aren't just excuses. They are ways to detach from the moral weight of what's happening. It's easier to hurt someone when you believe they brought it on themselves or when you're just doing what you're told. This isn't about monsters. It's about ordinary people finding ways to make bad actions feel acceptable. Now, contrast that with how some people act in a crisis. You've got heroes who step up, risking everything to help others. But then there are bystanders who do nothing, or worse, join in the harm. Why the difference? It's not always about courage. Sometimes it's about how people frame the situation in their minds. Heroes see a person in need and act. Bystanders might see the same situation and think, it's not my problem, or someone else will handle it. This isn't just about big, dramatic moments. It happens in everyday life too. Think about bullying or online trolling. People say cruel things, then justify it with, it's just a joke, or they can take it. That's moral disengagement at work. It's not that they are evil. It's that they've found a way to make their actions feel okay, even when they are not. The scary part, it's not just them. It's something anyone can fall into if they are not careful. The line between good and bad isn't as clear as we'd like to think. It's not about being a monster. It's about how easily we can convince ourselves that harm is justified. It's easy to think of evil as something far away, something that only happens in extreme situations. But the truth is, it often starts small. A moment of stress, a flicker of fear, or a sudden shift in power can push even good people toward choices they never thought they'd make. Think about the Milgram experiment, where ordinary people were told to deliver what they believed were painful electric shocks to someone else. They didn't want to hurt anyone, but under pressure they obeyed. Not because they were monsters, but because the situation made it feel like the only option. And it's not just in experiments. In real life, the tipping point can be subtle. Maybe it's staying silent when someone is treated unfairly because speaking up feels risky, or justifying a harsh decision because it's just the way things are. These small choices add up. They make harm feel normal, even necessary. Over time, the line between right and wrong starts to blur. What once felt unthinkable becomes just another step in the process. The scary part is you might not even notice it happening. Stress wears you down. Fear clouds your judgment, and when you're in a position of power or under someone else's, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. The next decision you make, no matter how small, could be the one that changes everything. It's not about being a bad person. It's about how easily the world can push you toward choices you never thought you'd face. And once you cross that line, it's hard to go back. You've seen how good people can slip into darkness, how the line between right and wrong can blur when we're not paying attention. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be that way. The moment you start to see your own shadow, the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore, is the moment you take back control. Self-awareness is your shield. It's what keeps you from becoming the kind of person you never thought you could be. Start by questioning your biases. We all have them, whether we admit it or not. They're the little voices in your head that tell you someone doesn't deserve your kindness or that cutting corners is just being smart. But when you pause and ask yourself why you think that way, you begin to unravel the threads that could lead you down a darker path. It's not about being perfect, it's about being honest. Then there's accountability. It's easy to blame others, to point fingers and say, "They made me do it." But the truth is, every choice is yours. Owning your mistakes, even the small ones, builds a kind of strength that keeps you grounded. It's not about guilt, it's about growth. And here's the most important part. Evil isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose step by step, decision by decision. But you can also choose differently. You can choose to see the humanity in others, to act with integrity even when it's hard, to stay true to who you are even when the world tries to pull you in another direction. That's the power you hold. It's not about being a hero, it's about being human. And that's enough. It's easy to think of evil as something distant, something that only exists in the shadows or in the actions of people we'll never meet. But the truth is, it's closer than we realize. Good people don't wake up one day and decide to become monsters. It's a slow process, shaped by circumstances, choices, and sometimes even the pressure to survive. Understanding this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it helps us see the humanity behind it, and maybe even recognize the potential for darkness in ourselves. If this made you think, let me know by dropping a word in the comments that stood out to you. It could be something like pressure, circumstances, or even humanity. It's a small way to show you've made it to the end, and it helps keep the conversation going. And if you found this worth your time,